Greetings, you black wizards and night spirits, and welcome again to Until the Last Gasp, the Extreme Metal Podcast. I'm Fraser, and today I'll be looking back on the career of possibly one of the most revered and respected black metal bands in the Norwegian Black Circle. I'm talking about Emperor. Just a reminder to like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to get in contact with me, I'm on Facebook. Just search Until the Last Gasp Extreme Metal Podcast. And all the previous episodes are also available on Facebook, Spotify, and now on Rumble. This show is produced by P-Noise Productions, so if you're after any assistance in your podcast or any other audio production needs, please drop them a line at P-Noise Productions. Their Gmail is P-Noise, spelled P-N-O-I-Z-E, productions at gmail.com, and they're also on Instagram. Links will be in the description, and just a quick update on the Hastur re-release. We're just putting the last polish, you would say, on the bonus tracks, and that with a final check over from Maj Nun Decide. Should hopefully mean that we'll have that to be announced within the next, I'd say, 2 weeks. So looking towards end of November, start of December, we'd have the announcement of that pre-order coming very soon. Keep an eye on that on our Facebook page, as well as it'll be going up on the Bandcamp page as well. Thanks very much. On with the episode. Emperor began in 1991 as a project of guitarist Samoth, and while he and vocalist lead guitarist Ishan were still in their previous band called Thou Shalt Suffer, what began as a few songs outside of the project involving both members and also the bass player Mortis, who would also go on to create his own self-titled project after these early recordings, would soon become the main focus of these young musicians' careers, and Thou Shalt Suffer was put to rest. In a short time, the band would release their first demo titled Wrath of the Tyrants, and then soon after that would also sign a deal with Candlelight Records. They would recruit young drummer Bard Faust Ethan, and they would record their debut self-titled EP. A quick note, these two releases are combined now as a full length, and as with Dissection releases, I highly recommend them, but I will not be covering them as they are not a part of the initial album releases. The litany of chaotic and dark events around the release of the first Emperor record are numerous and as wild as you would expect from any band in the dark circle of Norway's early black metal scene. They would, in the time between the EP and the release of this first album, have signed a deal with Euronymous of Mayhem's label Deathlike Silence. That would not end up with a release, as Euronymous would be stabbed to death by Burzum's Varg Vikernes. We also just detailed that one in the previous video episode that I did with Matt from Akamarachi. Do check that one out. The drummer of the band, Bard Faust Ethan, would also commit a murder and be imprisoned for a crime that was very similar to that of John Nodvide of Dissection, where he did stab a man in a park for approximately about 30 stab wounds. And also the guitarist Samoth would be found guilty of arson for his part in the burning of the Skjold church, along with Varg Vikernes, and sentenced to 16 months in prison. Now, do you think that time and the events in this would break and derail a young band? But in Emperor's case, you would be very wrong. They released, in my opinion, to be the greatest Norwegian black metal album of all time, titled In the Nightside Eclipse. The lineup for this debut album was Ishan on vocals, lead guitar and keyboards, Samoth on rhythm guitar, Tjort, I think it is pronounced, T-C-H-O-R-T, Tjort, on bass guitar, and Faust on drums. The album was also co-produced by Emperor and Python, who produced many artists in the early black metal scene, namely Mayhem, Burzum, Emperor, Immortal, and countless others. And this album was released on the 21st of February 1994, consisting of 9 songs at a total runtime of 48 minutes, 29 seconds. Track listing for this one was, number 1 would be the intro, number 2, Into the Infinity of Thoughts, 3, The Burning Shadow of Silence, 4, Cosmic Keys to My Creation and Times, 5, Beyond the Great Vast Forest, 6, Towards the Pantheon, 7, The Majesty of the Night Sky, 8, I Am the Black Wizards, and 9, Inuwa Satana. The album artwork was created by Christian Necrolord Warland, depicting a Tolkien scene of orcs marching towards Minas Morgul, and the logo was also done by the Lord of Logos, Christophe Spatiel. Cosmic Keys to My Creation and Times. Picking songs here is hard because I don't think that there's a bad song on here, and it is consistent as hell throughout. So I'll pick the most recognisable titles, and just to give any uninitiated listeners a good cue on where to begin with. So Cosmic Keys to My Creation and Time perfectly displays the menace and atmospheres that would work in tandem on this record, starting off with the potent evil black metal riff with Ishan's layering a stalled three-part scream, I'd say, that kicks in the song. And then once this gets kicked into gear, it's almost an ethereal, soaring ambient keyboard lines that start flooding the mix. As we head out of the verse, we met with chaotic keys and heavy jaunt that throws you around with great effect. Before we come back to the verse-chorus pattern, also have to add Ishan's vocals on this one is just absolutely possessed. I'm talking like pea soup hitting the walls, head spinning around, maniacal evil. This song is perfect melding pot of their elements and a great early show of their performance in the songwriting capability being so young. By comparison to the rest of the scene at this time, they were light years ahead. I Am the Black Wizards. This is quite possibly the most popular song in the band's live set. It also does get broken out every now and then in Ishan's encores for his solo shows. This one's a straightforward, aggressive black metal one that has a pretty folk-inspired sound and pretty dense atmospheres. It's got a mid-section with a really haunting, and it's pretty enchanting as it moves over to this kind of darkness that pulls you under its spell. The following riff and lead line's quite simple and hugely effective with a doom-like passage, an almost Middle Eastern melodic line that is layering in with Ishan's growling and cackling vocals. They then burst into the end of this song, which slows the evil intro down to a riff that's kind of almost a half-time pace, with the keys that surprise you as almost, I don't know, I dare say beautiful. That's what you would pretty much say that these are. They layer these in with screams and spoken word. It's almost an invocation of sorts, and this one fades out. It's really just an amazing song to experience, especially live. Definitely check this one out. Inuwa Satana. The sound of Inuwa Satana is grand, almost regal, and its introduction with neoclassical harmonized riffs opens up into Ishan's clean chanting vocals that kind of punctuate this with some rasp, and mixed in with other huger open key lines like you've had in previous songs. You almost get the feeling of like a dissection meld with Emperor on this one that, you know, they may have been sharing notes back in the day, but they definitely have that step down interlude section between verses to work to great effect between both these bands. So it's very noticeable on this one. The speed at the end of the song is almost like a final race to the finish with this brilliant balance of speed while maintaining the atmosphere of its keys. Once again, that does flood the mix to an epic feel here. We also run to the conclusion of this record here, and this is my personal favourite Emperor song. And to end a record like this, it just leaves you gobsmacked. This is an absolutely perfect display of really atmospheric black metal writing. This song and the entire record itself, there isn't a weak one on here. As far as debut records go in black metal, certainly has definitely up there as a contender for one of the greatest debut black metal records of all time, even in the mix for the greatest black metal record of all time. So, you know, there's plenty of accolades to be thrown around in the Emperor discography, but for my taste, it's definitely the first one is the go. After the completion of this album, bass player Tjort would leave the band during the hiatus brought on by Samuth's prison stint, but he would be paroled later in 1996, and the band would be resuming almost immediately, adding 2 new members to the lineup and heading into the studio late that same year to begin the recording of their follow-up album. Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk sits in the conversation of greatest albums in the black metal canon just as much as their previous effort does. I'd say it comes down to just me preference. The musical scope on this record is a big leap forward in production, so it does have a lot of fans that would pick this as an ease of entry over Nightside Eclipse, and it's also very guitar-driven. But the technical sides of this one too, and the atmospheres and evil from the previous record are replaced with a bit more of a pomp and grandeur, and their image and themes also in this one tend to take on that more fantasy base than you would say the typical evil satanic imagery and lyrical themes. For the most part, they would change what they termed their music art to be as sophisticated black metal. And so I guess that's kind of got everyone's, monocles twiddling in the music press as, egos would tend to run wild with such a statement like that. But, let's get it twisted. The album itself is definitely worthy of all of its praise and adulation. It's a masterwork. The band were musically faultless at this point, and you can't really argue with that. Well, you can, but I guess you'd have a hard time converting anyone with a real shit take like that. The lineup for this record was Ishan on vocals, guitar, and synthesizer. He also did arrangement, production, and mastering. Samuth was guitar, arrangement, mastering, and production. Ulva was on bass, trim, drums, and percussion. Python would also return again to helm the engineering and production for the record, and it was released on the 8th of July 1997 with 8 tracks and a total runtime of 43 minutes and 55 seconds. Your track listing for this one is number 1, Alsvater, The Oath, number 2, Ye Entrance Imperium, number 3, Thus Spake the Night Spirit, number 4, Ensorcelled by Chaos, number 5, The Loss and Curse of Reverence, number 6, The Acclamation of Bonds, number 7, With Strength I Burn, and number 8, The Wanderer. Artwork and photography would be by Jens for the sleeve photography. Stephen O'Malley would do the sleeve design. David Pulsar was sleeve photography. Christoph Spatial would do the sleeve illustrations and the good logo again. And NAP would do the sleeve design. Thus Spake the Night Spirit. The epic start to this classic and mainstay in the Emperor live set has a huge raspy scream and once again some really possessed vocals that run over the synthesizer horn section that you kind of have there. Very sampled sounding but still quite effective, which was also accompanied by some blast beats and some fast black metal riffing with fantastic melodic guitar lines that show how far they've really come in their technical abilities since their first record. The large spacey melodies to the end of the song have a real melancholy that's punctuated by Ishan's soulful sounding clean vocals, calling for the night spirit to embrace his soul. This is a musical and writing tour de force that, in my opinion, balances the more ambitious side of their writing while maintaining their black metal roots pretty well perfectly. The Loss and Curse of Reverence. This is a beast of a black metal song, which is fast and chaotic with really demonic vocals and soaring key lines that float over a real vortex of black metal madness below. It is a perfect escalation of elements from the Nightside Eclipse sound, and this does not let up for about the first 3 minutes. Then when it does, it moves into a sound that you would swear kind of had its home perfectly in the halls of Castle Dracula or something from a Castlevania soundtrack. But this is only a real stop-off, and it's only short as we're once again thrust back into the riffs from that earlier mid-paced melodic section that kind of seems a bit faster than what it was before. The tempo of this riffs drop back into the song and ends with Ishan vocally losing his shit and wailing all over this thing. This one's another masterpiece and has a metric fuckload of menace to boot. With Strength I Burn. The atmospheres to this song are rich, and for an 8-minute black metal epic, This moves across that runtime with a great balance of keeping that sophistication they aim for while still keeping its dark brooding intact. And all the while, its simplicity of it has a real black metal guitar sound behind what is the continual pattering of this fairly fast-paced double kick drum that helps maintain that balance of elements and maintaining some real teeth to it as well. After about the 5-minute mark, we're back in full swing black metal that continues to build on with its levels of aggression and pays off the previous 5 minutes of that maintained atmosphere with a final act that comes at you through the speakers with some of the most ferocious things on this record. The sound fades out with the most wonderfully simple black metal chords that kind of have these epic keys as well that fade into the next track, The Wanderer, perfectly. It's a great 1-2 punch of a track there with Strength I Burn into The Wanderer. So definitely after hearing this song, put on that change into The Wanderer just to hear how really well that effect goes through. This album is a real triumph in its scope and showed that black metal was more than just a satanic buzzsaw noise that was pretty much all over the scene at this point in time. The influence of this record's felt in many other bands that would don the kind of lacy undershirts and pose with goblets and candelabras that would follow. As they say, forever imitated, never replicated. This is an album without equal, and much like the first, and they had returned as an unstoppable creative force. At the end of the 90s, Emperor would drop their third record, 9 Equilibrium, and this album would be a well-defined shift from the dark atmospheres and overtly sinister Emperor of the earlier 90s. They would be writing with a sound more geared towards the sophisticated version of black metal that they were talking about that would be in full swing here, but it would have an extremely polished and razor-sharp production. The lineup for this one would be Ishan on vocals, lead guitar, synth and bass guitar, Samoth on rhythm guitars, and Trim on drums and percussion. It was produced by Thorbjorn Akerhaugen and released on March 15th, 1999 with 9 tracks and a total runtime of 44 minutes and 1 second. Track listing for this one would be number 1, Curse You All Men, 2, Decrystallizing Reason, 3, An Elegy of Icarus, 4, The Source of Icon E, 5, Sworn, 6, Nonus Equilibrium, 7, The Warriors of Modern Death, 8, The Blindness and Subsequent Sears, 9 would be the outro, A Hidden Track. Curse You All Men. Another setlist mainstay and an amazing opener. This song is perfectly represented by its opening vocal, which has a really harsh growl that transforms into an almost shrill, clean high that makes King Diamond's falsetto seem pretty weak by comparison. It also turns into this maniacal cackling of laughter that's over one of the most tense riffs in the Emperor catalogue. This song's really fast, and for about the first half, it's completely unyielding. Even its melodic guitar lines start to feel like they're razors thrown through hurricanes at you. And around the 3-minute mark, we get to the kind of tried and true Emperor drop back interlude. But even then, this time, it's not really pulling its punches as we return to the aggressive riffs of the intro and land us back where we started with the line, Curse You All Men. Absolute classic song. Definitely check this one out. An Elegy of Icarus. Emperor's push for a sound that's more full of sophistication is very much on display with the opening of this song. It's a very melodic song, even for Emperor. A lot more subtle in some respects, but it's not had its fangs really filed down at this point in any respect. But we do start to see a glimpse of the future direction the band would take. A more darkened metal, say, than over your real consistently black metal sound. A lot of chunky muted chords in the midsection with an intermediate blast section. Has some great effect on the song, and the transitions into it almost have a waltz to them before it becomes one of those kind of muted chords again. And we also return to the opening section as well, which we tend to do with a lot of Emperor songs, followed again by a real speedy jaunt to the end of the song. A sign of things to come with some progressive elements shining through for sure. Still not 100% into the progressive territory, but those toe dips would pretty much lend themselves to a full jumping in by the time we get around to that next record. Sworn. The opening riff of this song has so many pitch harmonics in it, it does at times feel like you got a record here written by a black metal John Christ or Zakk Wylde, respectively. But this song has a real black thrash feel to it, which I really dug, and the riffs have some great changes that command your attention. Another song like Curse You All Man that really goes for the throat, so it's a winner for me in this one. And this song, we have a nice headbanger riff at around the 3/4 mark that adds a nice bit of that downshift before they fly into the finish. This is a really satisfying song. The aggressive elements on this record are probably the most pissed off sounding in their entire discography, so they strike a good balance here that should help you be prepared somewhat for the shift in the writing that kind of was to come if you're listening to these albums pretty much chronologically. I mean, this one does have its elements there where it kind of trades them back off. You have the more aggressive sound, but you also have some songs on here that tend to be the more, I guess you would say, melodic or close to ballads in a black metal sense. And from there we go to Prometheus, The Discipline of Fire and Demise, which is the final record in the Emperor discography. I'm going to preface this by saying straight out the gate, Emperor have not written a bad record, but also this is a record that would probably sit more as an Ihsahn solo record. Does that mean I'm saying it's a bad record? Not at all, but I do feel this record, I'm saying I find it, I'd be more comfortable to say I find it more interesting or intriguing than a fully enjoyable black metal experience that I'd come to expect from Emperor. It would be a huge stretch to say this is a black metal record, and there are little fragments of it here and there, but there are more clean vocals than rasps and more melodic runs and chunky muted chords than trem-picked passages. And it's still very much an Emperor record in its core elements, but only one part of that Emperor sound, and it's really pushed to its furthest progressive metal edges. With Samathoth and the Wind writing with death metal project Zyklon with guys from Murkskog, it was left all up to Ihsahn to write what would be the end cap to Emperor's musical output. After hearing Ihsahn's solo album The Adversary released a few years after this, you can kind of hear where both Ihsahn and Samoth had kind of come to a musical impasse of interests. The lineup for this final outing was Ihsahn on vocals, lead guitar and rhythm guitar, synthesizers, bass guitar, programming, arrangement, and mixing. Samoth would do some additional guitars. Trim would do the drums and percussion. It was completely written and produced by Ihsahn. Thorbjørn Akkerhaugen would return for some mixing, and Tom Kvalsvold would do mastering. Really sorry about that one. It's got a lot of umlauts and vowels. Can I have a vowel, please? This would be released on the 21st of October in 2001 with 9 tracks and a total runtime of 51 minutes and 51 seconds. Your songs on this one would be number 1, The Eruption, 2, Depraved, 3, Empty, 4, The Prophet, 5, The Tongue of Fire, 6, In the Wordless Chamber, 7, Grey, 8, He Who Sought the Fire, and 9, Thorns on My Grave. The Eruption. Now, maybe it's me and I've been playing a fair bit of Castlevania at the moment, especially Symphony of the Night, but the intro to this song feels like it would be more at home in any kind of real dining hall or palace ballroom than you might actually say with what you would have from anything typically Emperor. But we do jump off from this into what would be kind of expected from Emperor with the fast riffing and drumming, but where we had the strong emphasis on black metal balanced with clean dark passages before, we really delved into a more aggressive prog metal sound rather than anything full force black metal. This song makes many twists and turns around slower, chunkier riffs, Also overplayed with some violins and keys with a vocal performance mostly centered on Ishan's clean vocals. This is a combination that Ishan has kind of outgrown with his black metal roots, doing the more raspy and then interspaced with cleans. It's more of a dominantly heavy, clean vocal, striving for something outside of the old dark medieval walls and confines of black metal. This is a very classical sounding song with soaring verses, layered violins, clean singing, and yeah, I guess you would say it's something that I would feel the record does still do a fair bit too much of, I guess you would say. As sometimes it just feels like this record goes on these tangents with these kind of clean layered classical interludes. Maybe a bit too much for my tastes, but it is what it is. Some people like it. Some people find it a bit too much. I'm in that camp. In the Wordless Chamber. This is the closest we get to a more wholly black metal experience on this record, which, with its symphonic lines, horn section, muted riffing, and dynamics that would really remind you of a more mid-2000s period Dimmu Borgir. And for those of you who need a respite or a bit of a break from the twists and turns of the more progressive direction on this last record, kind of like I did with this Experiencer, I would recommend this song, and at least where it sits in the record, it is a pretty welcome, straightforward palate cleanser to something more foundationally solid, and it gets your bearings regained leading into the back half of this record. I wouldn't say it's a classic as such, but it definitely has a great feel to it and is more reminiscent of the earlier stuff in its, I guess you would say, feel rather than execution. Thorns on my grave. Let it not be said that Emperor finished with a whimper, as this song thankfully gives, for the most part, the more aggressive tendencies of Ishan's writing this final hurrah. While not wholly black metal, it was, at least for my ears, a great way to end the record and the final song in their discography. A very grand, bombastic, and aggressive send-off for Emperor that was, with hindsight, the opening of the door to Ishan's solo career, as much as the closing of the door on the decade-long musical career for the band. Emperor have continued to reunite over the last 2 decades for special live appearances, and the records are now entering their 30-year anniversary, so I would expect that we haven't seen the end of their live appearances just yet. And if you do get a chance to catch them live, at least do it once, because they are still amazing to this day. That's where we're going to have to leave it for Emperor, but who knows what's to come next for these guys. Stranger things have happened, and we have seen records that we never thought we would see, so with a bit of luck we might see something new around the corner. So next what we're going to do is our next review here for Hyperdontia, their new album Hideous Entity, which has just been released. Hyperdontia are a 4-piece with the members from Denmark and Turkey, and they began in 2015. They're currently signed to Dark Descent Records, and the band consists of, and please forgive me for these horrible pronunciations, because I'm seeing a lot of I's with no dots, C's and G's with squiggly lines above them, below them, and, our Motorhead famous umlauts. So wish me luck on this one. Malik Kamilika plays bass, Tuna on drums, Mustafa Gurkalioglu on guitars, and Matthias Freiborg on guitars and vocals. I hope I haven't butchered that too much. Anyone, please forgive me for those pronunciations. Hideous Entity is the follow-up record for their hugely impressive debut record from 2018 called A Nexus of Teeth, and this one was going to be one to mark on the calendar, especially coming after that first one. This album delivers exactly what you would expect to be a follow-up record from that. A monstrous and vile slab of old-school inspired death metal that has its production perfectly balanced with raw and cavernous guitars and vocals, and that clear and fantastically weighty organic drum sound that is balanced perfectly in the mix. Solos that really cut through on this one have a shrill and disturbed wail to them. They're kind of like Slayer solos being pulled to their death through quicksand. Others are fairly similar to what you would expect to hear from aliens trying to probe your inner brain through your ear hole. The writing on this record is catchy as hell, and it comes with some great old school riff craft. We're not just here for nostalgia and plagiarism of the ones that came in the 90s on this one. This is truly what you get when devotees of old school try their hand to deliver something fresh to the mix. Fans of bands like Tomb Mold, Plague, and Mortiferum will already be onto this, I'm sure. And if not, definitely make sure you do. And there's not really a bad or average song on here. It is ridiculously consistent and crushing from track to track, so get in this one because it's bound to make top 10 lists for this year. And speaking of top 10 lists, I will be doing an episode for my top 10 releases of 2021, and I will be joined by Adam Anderson for his list of his top 10 from 2021. Adam has been a drummer in not only Monolith, the death metal masters from Melbourne, who was also in the brutal Death Merchants in Cranial Tremors. He's also aficionado when it comes to music and collecting brutal gems from the underground scene. The man's collection is a thing of beauty, and I'm really stoked to have him join me for that. But as for Hyperdontia's latest, my favourite tracks for that one is going to be, I will say, Snakes of Innards. Beast Within would be my definite number one on this record, and Grinding Teeth is also another great one to check out. But that's all I have for this week. Thanks for listening, and next week I'll be looking into the discography of Cancer. They were a band that came around in the 80s and released a string of records in the early 90s that are held up as some classics by some and not so much by others. But we'll definitely have a look into there. They had a very interesting career that kind of went a bit derailed into a hiatus and then a return to form with a follow-up record that came decades after their initial run. But until then, as always, stay safe, play it loud, and support metal until the last gasp. Have a great week, everyone. See you next time. Bye.
Gasp.